And I've been able to build a really nice kind of market profile there, local profile, particularly in the entrepreneurial community, and build a good client base as well. So just lots of moving parts. Some of it was deliberate actions, and some of it was just kind of figuring it out as we went along. Well, I think it's interesting because it's that, the whole assumption thing becomes very real when you work in different countries. And so the thing about assumptions, they kind of joke and they say, assume, makes an ass out of you and me, right? Or an ass, as they say here in America. And so, you learn that you can't just assume things are the same, that things are going to work the way they did back home or the way they do somewhere else. Just because I have a certain sense of humor, that doesn't necessarily carry in Brazil or doesn't wash in France or, in the UK, we have a very similar kind of way of talking and doing things, but there are still differences there. But particularly the US, where obviously this is where we've called home. So there was a lot of those sorts of things in terms of, working across cultures, working across different countries, different continents, where you just really see these fundamental differences. But it was really interesting because in that, I was always fascinated by how much was actually the same, right? So I remember working with a supply company in the oil and gas industry in Kazakhstan, a very large company. And I was working with some of their leadership teams. We were doing some strategic work, and then I was running them through some conversations around self-awareness and those sorts of things. And the conversations were just the same. They had the same challenges, for example, with millennials that companies have today. They were having similar challenges in terms of understanding that self-awareness is vital in terms of excellent leadership. And so that whilst there were these fundamental differences, there's a lot of similarities. And so you've got to learn at least the basics of the culture. How should you position yourself? How do you do things like, for example, I've met with Japanese business people, and the way you hand the business card to them is very different to the way we would do it in America or Australia. You just kind of give it to someone, or those sorts of things. It's just knowing some of those high level nuances. But then at the next kind of granular level, firstly, there's a little bit of grace. Secondly, it's then saying, well, okay, I want to learn these things, and giving them permission to tell you if something, either came across inappropriate, or just like, oh, you shouldn't say or do that, or hey, yeah, you should do more of that. So yeah, so the cross-cultural thing, it's really about, but the universal stuff that I found that kind of really sticks is being friendly, being relational, connecting. Most of my contacts when I'm working in different countries, they've come through friendships and connections and so forth. So we've already got something going on. I mean, even coming to America, that was through a very close friend, and opportunities that he opened for us. So relationally, you could connect, and they would help you then work into that culture. Preparing to work in different cultures is exactly that. It's preparing. Okay, so yes, there are some things where if I don't know enough, like if I don't know someone there or whatever, then I'll do some research on the culture. What are some things as a Westerner, or even as an Australian or an American? What are some of the things I need to know that could trip up the relationship? I guess that the tendency, though, is I don't go into these places without a relationship that already exists. In any business transaction, relationships are key. Actually, it was a conversation we were just having today with a group of business leaders, and we we're just saying just how important relationships are, and connecting and connections. And then those people then have kind of the freedom and the ability to speak into nuances that you need to be careful of, or some of the things that you should ramp up. When I came to America, speaking to a contact here, I said, look, why? I mean, you've got all these leadership coaches, you've got all these dynamic people here in America. Why do you want to hire an Aussie? It's like, and his response was, well, he says, Australians have a unique ability that Americans don't, and that is to see a problem and just charge straight through the middle of it. And he kind of laughed, and he goes, and because you got that great accent, you get away with it and you get the job done. And so so it's those sorts of things. Like it's kind of almost a humorous point, but it's real. And And so, that was kind of permission to be, in that context, that was permission to be a little bit Australian, right? And to be direct, because I mean, coaching, there's too many soft coaches out there. We've got to be direct. We've got to be able to connect with people, and we need to be able to call stuff out when it's not right. Yeah, so the Forge Leader originally came out of William had the idea. He had a brand called the Leadership Forge, which was more around forging in steel and all that sort of thing. Not massively congruent with who I am, and so we worked through this process. I had already developed a framework called the Trail Markers, and we both love the trails. He's a like a pack runner and such, a trail runner. I love mountain bikes. I don't get out as much as I used to, but I love it. And I live very close to the trails in Western North Carolina up in the mountains. And so there was just that constant outdoor kind of theme coming. So the trail markers I actually developed with a manufacturing company quite a few years before that, where we just said, look, there are these 5 kind of trail markers. So these things that sit on a trail and say, hey, you're on the right trail, like a blaze or a sign or something. And so we said, these 5 markers. And so that's where we shifted the brand from the Leadership Forge to the Forge Leader. I think the final decision was based on the fact that we could get the .com. Like a lot of people do. I mean, let's not beat around the bush about that one. But I love the title. I love the idea of forging a journey, forging a path. Like it's in a sense, the whole forging thing is cutting a path where there isn't a path, and getting some clarity and direction, and then allowing, once you cut a path, other people can follow you. And so, that's obviously one of the greatest leadership traits, is that, well, you're not really a leader if people aren't following you. So that's where we evolved from, the Leadership Forge into the Forge Leader, and started to really develop out around. And so the Forge Leader today, whilst yes, there are some programs that I'm running, and there's some programs that William is running, and so we do probably, I'd say 60-70% of our work separately, but we are still working together. The one thing we have as common core is the trail. Correct. So the trail markers were developed. I was actually working with an RFID manufacturing company in the local area, and the trail markers were developed to work with the leadership team and say, okay, we need to have these things in order. We had a whole bunch, and we kind of narrowed it down to these 5 that were a broad framework. So the first trail marker is purpose. The second trail marker is strategy. Originally, funnily enough, we actually had people before strategy in the original one. Then we said, no, well, hang on. You've got to have a purpose. You've got to have a reason why you exist. That's kind of like your guidepost. That's the stuff that's really important. And then there's, okay, so now I know why I exist. I know what my boundaries are, like my core values, all that sort of thing. The next thing is, okay, so how do I actually turn this into something, right? Because a lot of people either stay in vision land, or they get too locked down into all the stuff I've got to do. And so we then said, okay, so we need a strategy, but it's not just this high level strategy, although that's where we start. The next step is, how do you turn that into something you can take action on tomorrow? And in fact, one of the kind of the key phrases we use at the Forge Leader is, the Forge Leader knows who they are and what they have to do next, right? It's that kind of that dichotomy. There's this, and then there's all the stuff I've got to do. So strategy kind of leads you into the tactics. These are the things that we need to do to be successful and to execute on our why. So once you've got those 2 things in place, and those 2 are the most important, and that's where we do spend a lot of time with clients, you come to the third one, which is people. And so it's basically, I know why I exist. I know kind of the direction I'm going in. Well, who am I going to bring around that, right? And it's much easier to determine the kinds of people, their strengths and weaknesses, their behavioral styles. There's all sorts of different kind of tools and frameworks you can use based on why we exist and where we're going. So that's where the third trail marker, people, and that's why we shifted people into the third trail marker, because that makes sense, right? It's a bit silly to bring people around when you don't know, have I got the right people? And this came out of that. There's there's this kind of real generic saying all the time. I got to have the right people in the right seats on the bus. Right? We hear it all the time. Well, my favorite question ever, the coach, my favorite question is, what kind of bus are you driving? and so that's going to determine how many seats we have. Are they comfortable? Are we going on a long distance drive, or are we just a little school bus? Or maybe it's, I don't know. But the whole point is that we need those two fundamentals in place before we start bringing people around.